guard slammed the metal door shut, and I heard the lock click behind me. Solitary confinement. 23 hours a day in a concrete box no bigger than a closet. And as I sat there in the darkness, covered in tattoos that marked me as a killer, something happened that I cannot explain. A light filled that cell. Not from the window, not from the hallway. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. And standing in front of me was a man I had never seen before. But somehow I knew exactly who he was. He looked at me with eyes full of love, not judgment. And he said 4 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about myself. He said, "I forgive you, my son." And in that moment, the man who had taken 17 lives, the man who had tortured and maimed without mercy, the man who had sold his soul to the Yakuza at 14 years old, that man fell to his knees and wept like a child. But let me take you back to where this all started, because you need to understand who I was before you can understand what happened to me. I grew up in Osaka, Japan, in a district that most people pretend does not exist. It was a neighborhood of narrow streets and crumbling buildings where garbage piled up in the alleys, and the smell of desperation hung in the air like fog. My father was a drunk who beat my mother every night. I can still hear the sound of his fists hitting her body. I can still hear her crying, begging him to stop. I would hide under my bed with my hands over my ears, and I would promise myself that one day I would be strong enough that no one would ever hurt me or anyone I loved again. But my father's violence was not the worst part. The worst part was the shame. In Japanese culture, honor is everything. Your family name is everything, and my family had none. We were outcasts. We were less than nothing. The other children at school would not speak to me. Their parents told them to stay away from the boy with the alcoholic father. Teachers looked at me with pity in their eyes, which was somehow worse than hatred. I learned very young that in this world, you are either a predator or you are prey. There is no middle ground. There is no mercy for the weak. My mother tried her best. She worked 2 jobs cleaning office buildings, leaving before sunrise and returning after I was asleep. But no matter how hard she worked, there was never enough money. My father drank it all away. And when she confronted him about it, he would beat her even worse. I remember one night, I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and I heard her screaming louder than usual. I ran out from under my bed and I saw him choking her against the wall. Her face was turning purple. Without thinking, I grabbed a kitchen knife and I ran at him. I stabbed him in the leg. He dropped my mother and turned on me with murder in his eyes. That was the first time he beat me instead of her. He broke 2 of my ribs and fractured my cheekbone. But as I lay on the floor, bleeding and broken, I felt something strange. I felt proud. I had protected my mother. I had been strong. By the time I was 12 years old, I was already running with older boys in the neighborhood. They were street kids like me, boys from broken homes who had learned to survive by any means necessary. They taught me how to steal, how to fight, how to pick pockets and run scams on tourists, how to disappear into a crowd when the police came looking. And they introduced me to a man named Tanaka who would change my life forever. Tanaka was a lieutenant in the Yamaguchi Gumi, the largest Yakuza syndicate in Japan. He wore expensive suits and drove a black Mercedes. When he walked into a room, everyone fell silent. He had this presence, this aura of power that I had never experienced before. And for some reason, he took an interest in me. He saw the rage that I kept buried deep inside. He saw the hunger for respect, for power, for a family that would never abandon me. And he knew he could use it. He started giving me small jobs, delivering packages, being a lookout during meetings. He paid me more money than I had ever seen, and he treated me with respect that no adult had ever shown me before. He told me I was special. He told me that if I proved my loyalty, I would become part of a family. I still remember the night of my initiation. I was 14 years old. They took me to a warehouse by the docks, a cavernous building that smelled of fish and rust and blood. There were candles everywhere, casting flickering shadows on the walls. About 20 men stood in a circle, all of them wearing black suits, all of them staring at me with cold, evaluating eyes. And in the center of the circle was a man tied to a chair. He was maybe 30 years old, with a face swollen from beatings and eyes wide with terror. Tanaka walked me to the center and announced to everyone that I was being given the chance to prove myself. He said this man had stolen money from the organization. He said that disloyalty was the worst crime a man could commit. Then he handed me a knife and told me to cut off the man's finger. I looked at the knife in my hand. I looked at the man in the chair. He was crying, begging, promising he would pay it all back. I hesitated for just a moment, and Tanaka leaned in close to me and whispered something that I have never forgotten. He said, "If you cannot do this, then you are useless to us. And useless men do not live very long in our world." So I did it. I grabbed the man's hand and I cut off his little finger while he screamed. The sound he made was not human. The blood was warm on my hands. And when it was over, when they wrapped his hand and dragged him away, the men in the circle applauded. Tanaka put his arm around me and told everyone that I was now his son, that I was family, and something inside me died that night. Something human, something that connected me to the rest of the world. And in its place grew something cold and dark and hungry for power. Over the next 10 years, I rose quickly through the ranks. I had a talent for violence that impressed even the most hardened men. I never hesitated. I never showed mercy. By 20 years old, I was running my own crew of 12 men. We controlled gambling, prostitution, drug trafficking, and protection rackets across 3 districts. The money was unbelievable. I had a penthouse overlooking the city. I drove cars that cost more than most people make in a lifetime. I had women, power, respect, everything I thought I wanted. But there was this emptiness inside of me that I could not fill no matter what I did. I would wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, seeing the faces of the people I had hurt. Their eyes would stare at me in the darkness, accusing, pleading, asking me why. I would drink to forget, but the memories always came back stronger. I would find new women, thinking that love might save me, but I was incapable of love. I did not even know what love was. I was incapable of feeling anything except anger and fear. And the higher I rose, the lonelier I became. Because in the Yakuza, everyone is either above you or below you. There are no friends. There are no equals. There are only allies and enemies. And allies become enemies the moment it serves their interests. I trusted no one, and no one truly knew me. I was surrounded by people and utterly alone. When I was 24 years old, I did something that would haunt me forever. There was a rival gang trying to move into our territory. They were selling drugs to kids in our neighborhoods. The bosses decided they needed to be eliminated entirely. And I was given the assignment. I took 3 men with me to their headquarters, a small restaurant that served as a front. We went in through the back door just after midnight. There were 9 men there, playing cards, drinking. They looked up when we entered. And then the killing began. What happened next, I cannot describe in detail because even now, 20 years later, I cannot speak of it without feeling physically ill. The screams still echo in my mind, the blood, There was so much blood. Some of them begged for their lives. Some of them cried out for their mothers. One man showed me a picture of his children, his hands shaking, tears streaming down his face. He said, "Please, please, they need their father." And I looked at that picture of those innocent children and I felt nothing, nothing at all. I pulled the trigger anyway. After that night, my reputation was sealed. They called me Akuma, the demon, and I wore that name like a badge of honor. I was untouchable. I was invincible. I was the man that other men feared. I was everything I had dreamed of becoming when I was that little boy hiding under his bed, listening to his mother's screams. I had become strong. I had become powerful. No one would ever hurt me again. But the nightmares got worse. Every night I saw their faces. Every night I heard their screams. The emptiness grew deeper until it felt like a black hole in the center of my chest, swallowing everything. And I started to realize something terrible. I had not escaped my father's legacy at all. I had become him. No, I had become something worse than him. He was a violent drunk who could not control himself. I was a cold, calculating killer who chose violence deliberately, systematically, professionally. My father destroyed one family. I had destroyed dozens. I was a monster wearing a human face, and monsters cannot be saved. Or so I thought. When I was 28 years old, everything fell apart. There was a power struggle within the organization. The old boss had died, and different factions were fighting for control. I backed the wrong side. I chose loyalty to Tanaka, but Tanaka lost. And suddenly, the man who had been untouchable found himself with a target on his back. They came for me on a Tuesday night. I was leaving a club with two of my men when the first shots rang out. I took a bullet in the shoulder and another in the leg. My men went down instantly. I managed to crawl behind a car and return fire, but I was bleeding badly. Then the police sirens. They had been building a case against me for years. 17 counts of murder, racketeering, drug trafficking. The list went on for pages. My trial lasted 3 months. And when the judge read the verdict, he looked at me with such disgust. I will never forget it. Guilty on all counts. Life imprisonment without parole. I was sent to Fuchu Prison, one of the most notorious maximum security facilities in Japan. A place where the worst of the worst was sent to be forgotten. And because of who I was and what I had done, because I was Akuma, I was placed in the highest security wing with 23-hour lockdown. My first year there, I was attacked 4 times by members of rival gangs who had ended up in the same prison. They wanted to make their names by killing the demon, but I survived because violence was all I knew. I fought back with a ferocity that shocked even the guards. They learned to fear me, just as men on the outside had learned to fear me. But the loneliness was overwhelming. No one from the outside ever visited me. My mother had died years ago. I had no father, no siblings, no friends. The organization I had served, the family I had killed for, they pretended I did not exist. I was completely and utterly alone with nothing but my demons for company. It was in my 5th year of imprisonment that they put me in solitary confinement. I had gotten into a fight with another inmate, a young punk from a rival gang who thought he could make a name for himself. He came at me with a sharpened piece of metal, trying to stab me in the throat. I disarmed him and broke his arm in 3 places. Then I fractured his skull against the concrete floor. The guards pulled me off him and threw me in the hole. That is what we called solitary. The hole. A concrete cell with no windows, no furniture except a thin mattress on the floor, and a single dim light bulb that they controlled from outside. I would be there for 30 days. The first week, I paced like a caged animal. The second week, I started talking to myself just to hear a human voice. The third week, I began to lose my mind. I would see things in the shadows, faces forming in the darkness, hands reaching for me from the walls. I could hear voices whispering my name, calling me Akuma, laughing at me, accusing me. The faces of everyone I had killed would appear before me, staring at me with dead eyes, asking me why. Why? Why? I could not sleep. I could not escape. I was trapped in that tiny cell with all the demons I had created, and they were consuming me piece by piece. It was on the 21st day that everything changed. I was lying on my mattress, staring at the ceiling, when suddenly the cell was filled with light. Not the dim yellow light from the fixture outside. This was a pure, brilliant white light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was so bright that I should have been blinded, but somehow I could see more clearly than I had ever seen in my life. And standing in the corner of my cell was a figure. He was not Japanese. He was not Western. He was something else entirely. His skin seemed to glow from within, as if light was flowing through his veins instead of blood. He wore simple white robes that moved even though there was no wind. And his eyes were what stopped my heart. They were filled with such love and such sorrow that I felt something break open inside my chest just looking at him. I knew instantly that this was not a hallucination. This was not my tortured mind playing tricks on me. This was real. This was more real than anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. And I knew, without anyone telling me, exactly who he was. I had heard about Jesus once before. Years ago, there was a Christian prisoner, a Korean man who had been convicted of some minor crime and ended up in my block. He tried to tell me about a God who loved sinners, about a Savior who died for the worst of humanity. I had laughed in his face. I had told him that if there was a God, he certainly did not love someone like me. I was beyond redemption. I was beyond saving. I was Akuma, the demon, and demons do not get saved. They get destroyed. But here he was, standing in my cell, looking at me not with judgment, not with disgust, not with the hatred that I knew I deserved. He was looking at me with love, pure, unconditional, overwhelming love, the kind of love I had never known existed. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My throat was closed with emotion I did not know I could feel. And then he walked toward me, slowly, deliberately, each step filling me with more awe and more terror than the last. When he reached me, he knelt down so that his face was level with mine, and he reached out his hand and touched my face. The moment his fingers touched my skin, something shattered inside of me. All the walls I had built over 30 years, all the armor I had wrapped around my heart since I was that boy hiding under his bed, all the coldness and the rage and the emptiness, it all shattered in an instant, like glass breaking into a million pieces. And what came pouring out of me was grief, pure, raw, overwhelming grief for everything I had done, for everyone I had hurt, for all the lives I had taken, for the man I had become. I fell to my knees and I wept. I wept like I had never wept before, not even as a child. Great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I wept for the 9 men I killed in that restaurant. I wept for the father whose children would grow up without him. I wept for all the families I had destroyed. I wept for my mother who had died alone while I was out building my empire of blood. I wept for the little boy who had only wanted to be safe and had turned himself into a monster to achieve it. I wept and wept and wept until I had no tears left. And through it all, Jesus stood beside me. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence said everything It said, I know what you have done. I know every person you killed. I know every drop of blood on your hands. And I love you anyway. I forgive you anyway. I died for you anyway. When I finally stopped crying, I looked up at him and I asked the only question that mattered. How can you forgive me? How can you love someone like me? I have done things that cannot be forgiven. I have taken lives that cannot be restored. I am a demon. And he smiled at me. It was the most beautiful smile I have ever seen, full of compassion and grace and hope. And he said, I forgive you, my son. That is exactly why I came. I did not come for the righteous. I came for the sinners. I came for the lost. I came for you. He placed his hand on my head, and I felt warmth spread through my entire body, starting from where he touched me and flowing down to every fiber of my being. It was like being washed clean from the inside out. All the darkness, all the guilt, all the shame, all the blood, it was being lifted off of me, carried away by a river of light. And in its place was peace, real peace, true peace. For the first time in my entire life, I felt peace. When I opened my eyes, the light was gone. The cell was dark again, but I was not the same person I had been before. The demon was gone. Akuma had died on that cold concrete floor. In his place was something new, something fragile and tender and alive with hope. For the first time in decades, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I could be saved. The next morning, when the guards came to check on me, they found me on my knees, praying. They thought I had finally cracked, finally lost my mind completely, but I had not lost anything. For the first time in my life, I had found something. I had found grace. When I got out of solitary, everything was different. The other inmates noticed it immediately. The violence was gone from my eyes. The rage was gone from my heart. I walked differently, spoke differently, carried myself differently. Some of them thought it was a trick. Some of them thought I had gone soft and tried to take advantage. But something protected me. Every time someone tried to hurt me, something would happen to prevent it. A guard would appear at exactly the right moment. They would slip and fall before they could reach me. Their weapon would break. It was as if an invisible shield had been placed around me. I started reading the Bible. Another Christian inmate smuggled one to me, and I devoured it like a starving man devours food. Every word spoke directly to my soul. I read about Paul, who had persecuted and killed Christians before Jesus appeared to him on the road to Damascus and transformed him into an apostle. And I wept because I saw myself in his story. If God could forgive Paul, then maybe he really could forgive someone like me. I started telling other inmates what had happened to me. At first they laughed. The great Akuma, the demon himself, talking about Jesus, it seemed absurd. But when they saw that the change in me was real, when they saw that month after month, year after year, I remained peaceful and loving and kind, some of them started to listen. And some of them started to believe. Over the next 15 years, I led hundreds of men to Jesus Christ in that prison. Murderers, rapists, thieves, gang members, the absolute worst of the worst. They came to me broken and hopeless. And I told them what Jesus had told me. And I watched as the same miracle that had happened to me happened to them. I watched as the light entered their eyes and the darkness left their hearts. I watched as demons became disciples. In 2019, after 30 years in prison, my case was reviewed. There had been new evidence that some of my convictions were based on testimony that had been coerced. And while I was still guilty of many crimes, the court decided that I had served enough time. I was going to be released. I walked out of those prison gates on a spring morning with nothing but the clothes on my back and a Bible in my hand. I was 60 years old. I had spent more than half my life behind bars. But I was not the same man who had walked in. That man had died in a solitary confinement cell. The man who walked out was someone entirely new, a new creation, as the Bible says. The old had passed away. The new had come. Today, I run a ministry for former Yakuza members and prisoners across Japan. We help them find jobs, housing, purpose, and most importantly, we help them find Jesus. I speak in churches and prisons, sharing my testimony with anyone who will listen. Many people find it hard to believe. A Yakuza killer saved by grace? It seems impossible. But that is the whole point. With God, nothing is impossible. I still carry the weight of what I did. The faces of the people I killed still visit me in my dreams. I will carry that burden until the day I die. I have tried to make amends where I can, writing letters to families, asking for forgiveness I know I do not deserve. Some have responded with grace. Some have responded with anger. And I accept both because both are deserved. But I also know that I am forgiven, not because I earned it, not because I deserved it, but because Jesus chose to love me when I was unlovable. He reached into the darkest pit of hell and pulled out a demon and transformed him into a child of God. If you are watching this and you think you are too far gone, let me tell you something from one who knows. You are not. There is no sin so great that it can separate you from the love of God. There is no darkness so deep that his light cannot reach it. I am living proof. I was Akuma, the demon. Now I am a child of God. And if he can save me, he can save anyone.